right, for our next card, we're going to create this beautiful little wreath here. So the very first step, we're going to emboss our background. And this is a 3D embossing folder, so it's got a lot of texture and a lot of dimension to it. We're going to take a mister bottle. I'm just going to do it off screen so that I don't get water on my surface. So I did 2 light mists for each side of the paper. And this is just going to soften the paper and help to get that impression in there. So grab my machine. So for 3D embossing folders, I don't need that top plate. I only need 1 plate, and I need to open this up. And to get all that texture in there, I go back and forth a couple times just to really press it in there. So move this out of the way here. There we go. It almost looks like a piece of wood. So this is going to be trimmed down a little bit so that you can still see the mat around the outside of the wood part, but I'm going to let that sit to dry, and I don't want to sit it on my card base to do that. So next we're going to emboss our sentiment. So I've got some embossing ink here. I'm going to press my stamp in there. And I am going to trim this down once it's embossed. So it's easiest to take a piece of cardstock that's a little bit too big and then trim it down once you're done, rather than having something that's the exact size that you want and then trying to be totally straight and precise with it. Put the excess back in there. I'm just flicking all that embossing powder right off of that paper because I'm going to be using it in a second with some different powder, and I don't want to mix the two. So if by chance you have any powder where you don't want it, you want to take a soft brush and brush it away. I've got just kind of a little clump there. If you don't brush it away, the heat tool is going to emboss it right into your cardstock and you're never going to get rid of it. So you definitely have to get rid of it before it's melted. And you can see what happens once it's melted. It goes from being kind of a dull matte and grainy to shiny and glossy. And if you've never embossed before, this is an embossing tool. It emits heat, it doesn't blow air. So you need something that emits heat so that it just melts the powder where it is. If you use, say, a blow dryer or something, that's just going to blow the powder right off, and it doesn't work the same, and it doesn't get hot enough. I worked in a scrapbook store for many years, and that was the one common question I got asked was, can I just use a blow dryer? Because some of the heat tools look very similar to blow dryers, but they do completely different things, so you can't use it. So that is ready to go when we need it. Move the trimmer out of the way, and then we're going to, oops, I'm going to turn this the other way so I'm inking on the same side. Then we're going to ink our holly die cuts. So I'm doing them the same way as I did the greenery from before. And I'm going to ink them first, and then we're going to add some special embossing powder to them. And once again, I don't bother with inking the stem or the base of it because it all gets tucked in behind, so it's not necessary. Two more to go. There we go. All right, that can go to the side. So now the next step is to finish those holly, and I'm using some frosted crystal distress embossing powder, and what this does is it just gives the holly a bit of a different texture. Not sure if you're going to be able to see it, but it almost makes it look like it's got some frost on it, And some of the areas are a little bit glossy, but some of it is kind of matte, and it's definitely more textured than regular embossing powder. It's not the same as regular embossing powder. So I'm going to use my finger to just make sure that that holly leaf gets tapped in there. And because we're doing a whole bunch, I'm not putting the powder right back into the container every single time. I'm going to pour it on there, and then I'm going to melt it. If you have a, it starts to curve like that, you can do it on your surface as long as your surface can handle heat. It just helps to hold it in place. So there we've got one that is done beside one that is not done. Now you can see some of the powder is on my tweezers here. It just wipes right off, and I don't aim my heat gun at it so it doesn't actually get melted on there. You'll notice when I can just do this with the powder to get it on there. I do tap the excess off just because there's no point in having excess on there. There we go. So I'm going to continue doing this. I'll do it off screen because there's no point in watching me do the same thing 8 times. It's exactly the same as the last 2 I just did. And I will be back once our background here is completely dry and ready to be inked. All right, our background here is completely dry and we're ready to ink it. So I'm just going to go kind of with the rings of the tree. Typically when I'm using ink blending brush and blending, I kind of go from the outside. But this one, and that's just with this embossing folder, it's got some different lines to it. So to make them look a little bit more natural, I'm just going to kind of go, I'm arching them with little lines on the embossing folder. And obviously you could create this card with any embossing folder. If you wanted to switch it up, it would totally work. Or you could do it without an embossing folder, but I do like the texture that it gives the outside of the card, or the back base of the card, sorry. And you can ink as much or as little as you want. I like to put some areas a little bit darker around the edges just to kind of give it a little bit of, kind of frame it a little bit. There we go, that's enough. I don't want it to get too dark. So I am going to glue this onto the base here. And then I like to put an acrylic block on there to hold it in place, to hold it down, to give that really good contact with the card base. Because 3D embossing folders have so much dimension to them, you want to make sure that you get some glue onto the lower areas that are going to touch the base of your card to make sure that that gets glued down really well. All right, I'm going to put that there, let that completely dry, and I'll see you in the next video and we'll start to assemble our wreath.